You know, sometimes one sees contemporary news and wonders if the world is cursed to forget principles and fall for the same deadly rights-destroying rhetoric that most murderous states and despots have used on their rampages across the globe. And it certainly seems that out of New Zealand, we see another example of this, because New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, along with even harsher attacks on gun ownership, has proposed a statute to actually call the right to keep and bear arms a government-provided privilege. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. And you know, shortly after a maniac broke numerous New Zealand laws, including gun laws, to attack 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand in March of this year, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern issued a wildly authoritarian executive order to supposedly ban all semi-automatic rifles. Of course, she had no time to note that the gun laws already didn't stop the attacker from breaking them. She just proceeded with her orders, and of course, the orders would not see criminals comply. And then the government issued a mandatory voluntary gun buyback, something that lets us actually extract 2 lessons before we get into this new information. First, the guns were never owned by the government, so the very concept of a buyback is just mindless parroting of nonsensical political rhetoric. And second, the vast majority of New Zealand gun owners didn't comply. As JD Tusil notes, for reason, only about 0.00046% of New Zealand guns were handed in. And of course, the guns aren't registered, which appears to be the spark that ignited Ardern on this new quixotic and despotic quest, as Michael Tennant of The New American explains. The victims of the March mass shootings in Christchurch, New Zealand had hardly been buried when gun-grabbing politicians rammed through stricter firearms laws. Now they're at it again, aiming to, quote, enshrine in law that owning a firearm is a privilege and comes with an obligation to demonstrate a high level of safety and responsibility, in the words of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And in so doing, Ardern employs the same species of rhetoric that 20th century despots employed when demonizing gun owners to disarm peacefully minded people. Stuart Nash, the government's police minister, also echoed her forbidding threat, saying, "Under the current law, we do not know exactly how many guns are in circulation, who owns them, who is selling them, who is buying them, or how securely they are stored against the risk of theft or misuse." And you never will, Minister, for the simple fact that criminally minded people want guns. Black markets always circumvent statutes, and criminally minded people are, as a result, and as has been shown over and over again in history, going to get their hands on guns. As John Milkmore reports for intellectualtakeout.org, lawful gun owners accounted for just 18% of gun violence, according to a recent study conducted by researchers at the University of Pittsburgh. Researchers analyzed 762 cases in which a gun was recovered by the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police Firearm Tracking Unit, FTU. Most perpetrators, 79%, were carrying a gun that did not belong to them, researchers concluded. And for that simple reason, peacefully minded folks in New Zealand who've learned from history are already resisting gun mandates. Days after the Christchurch attacks, PM Ardern announced her executive ban on semi-automatic rifles. And of course, they offered their so-called gun buyback. And because so few people complied, and because people who own their own firearms without having to register them know that the government is not going to protect them, they did not turn them in. So the government is engaging in its next step. According to the New Zealand Herald, the newly proposed law, which will have to undergo the normal parliamentary process, calls for stricter licensing requirements for both gun dealers and gun owners, more frequent license renewals, a national gun registry, a ban on foreigners purchasing guns in the country, new licensing requirements for shooting clubs and ranges, restrictions on gun advertising, and new offenses and higher penalties for breaking the rules. We see the Prime Minister actually saying that the right to keep and bear arms is not a right, but a government-preferred privilege that they can revoke at any time. In fact, the New Zealand Prime Minister and her police minister are bounding headlong down a path trod many, many times before, and you and I know this. We've seen it in the words of people like Mao Zedong, who said, "All political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way, no guns can ever be used to command the party." And like this, from Adolf Hitler, "The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the subject races to possess arms. History shows that all conquerors who have allowed their subject races to carry arms have prepared their own downfall by so doing. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that the supply of arms to the underdogs is a sine qua non for the overthrow of any sovereignty." And to sum it all up, for the New Zealand politicians and the American politicians who would applaud their attacks on the right to keep and bear arms, the right to free speech, the right to individual sovereignty and self-ownership, here are the words of the USSR's Lenin. "Our power does not know liberty or justice. It is established on the destruction of the individual will." Words to keep in mind. We must be vigilant. Congregate with people who feel like we do, and try to convince others of the importance of these inherent rights that are being attacked all the time by collectivists, just like the collectivists of old. Thank you so much for sharing this video, for watching this video, and for being part of this group. For MRC-TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.